All right, welcome back to another episode of Dan vs. Dave, an epic battle of flat Earth versus globe Earth. So, this week is about gravity. So, Dave's doing an interview with a guy about flat Earth, and Dan is pretending to debate him and explain to us how he would debate him. So, the first thing is, how he would debate him is not debate him. Debate him behind closed doors like a coward, so Dave can't refute your points. That's the first strategy he would use because that's the strategy he's using. Okay. So the gentleman that's interviewing Dave says, what about gravity? We have the lights in the sky. We know that gravity creates those lights in the sky to be planets and stars and all the rest of it. So wouldn't you assume the Earth is a sphere? Now, this is where I believe Dave makes mistakes. Now, I'm a perfect moderator for this debate. I will be critical of Dave, and I've been critical of Dave in the past, and it's over this issue. It's over the issue of doing science with religious people. So Globers are religious. They're the most religious people you'll ever meet. So religious people will do things like say, Jesus walked on water. And you'll say, do you have proof of that? And they'll say, no, I believe it on faith. And they'll say, I need proof. I need some objective evidence that this happened. And they say, well, I just take it upon faith. And Globers do the same thing with the word gravity. That word is a faith. That word is, okay, if the earth was spinning, we need a force that pulls everything to the center of mass. Newton's laws of gravity, we're talking about the lights in the sky. And because his version of the lights in the sky are different than ours, he needs a force to pull everything to the center of mass. He needs things to stick things to a spinning ball. If you don't have a spinning ball, you do not need gravity. Now, Dave is going to explain this, and he does a pretty good job of it, but he makes a little bit of a mistake, in my opinion, because he's doing science with religious people. And you're going to even hear Dan infer to religion. He's going to call theories facts, and then the facts don't necessarily need proof, and he says they have proof, and it's pure faith. It's pure theory. It just is. It's the words and the actions don't mimic each other, and they don't need to, because he just wants it to fit his theory. And the theory is that you can become a god by emotionally connecting to a thing called science, and then that gives you godhood. It gives you this emotional experience that just overwhelms you, and then you don't have to live in reality. Dan doesn't live in reality. Reality is words mimicking actions. So why does an object fall? Observationally, we do not observe a force pulling on it. The object falls according to the air. Now, Dan's going to make a critical mistake, and if there were a debate, he would get disqualified for this mistake because he said something that blatantly wasn't true. He said all objects fall at the same speed, and that's not true. A Kleenex that is not bound up, but that is just a light piece of paper that falls, it's going to fall like this. Now, when you bind that and crumple that Kleenex up and drop it, it falls much faster. So it is true, a rock and a wood chip will fall at relatively the same weight if there isn't another cause that comes along and overcomes the mass of the object. Now, there's no proof of an outside force messing with the mass of the object. If wind comes and blows on the rock and the wood chip might move because of the wind. We see the cause and the effect. We do not see the gravity. We do not measure the gravity. Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson will say, we don't know what gravity is. This is true. It's a particle. We know it's there, but we don't know what it is. And then he'll reference the Cavendish experiments and things like that and say we can measure it, which is not true because you don't get the same result every time in the experiment. And we'll get into that in a second. But first we got to unpack down and up real quick. So objects fall unless they interact with the air. Unless the air changes, there's different types of air. A pilot will say, hey, we're going to take it up to 35,000 feet. We're going to take it up to 40,000 feet to find some clean air. We got some rough air here because the plane's bouncing all over the place in the heavy air. There's particles in the air and stuff. There's no proof of this gravity. It was a theory by a guy who wore a robe that worked for a church, and he probably molested kids like every other person that goes to those churches. We're going to probably find out that Dan wears a robe and messes with children, just like all the rest of them, because they're in cults, because they're doing religion, and it makes them feel like they're gods, and then it makes them feel like they can hurt people and steal their energy. Anyways, so the Cavendish experiment was a pole with 2 balls, and then hung other 2 balls next to those balls, put it in a controlled room to see if they moved at all. We don't need to go any further. All we need to do is see if they repeated it and repeated it and repeated it, and if they got the exact same numbers, and they didn't. They didn't. These scientists are going to say, we basically did. It was close enough. In science, that's not close enough. In religion, your faith wants it to be true because you want to be a god. You want to control the meaning of words. You want to say things fall because of an outside force that you came up with, that you partnered with from a Jesuit priest. Heliocentrism comes from the Jesuits, and it comes from cult leaders. Cavendish was a cult leader. Newton and Newtonian physics. They'll say Newtonian physics, which has to do with things sticking to spinning balls, looking at outer space. And then they bring that outer space in here and say, things must need a force to hold things to the center of mass. On a flat plane, you don't need a force to hold things to the center of mass. Things just are, and then we name them and we relate to them. When the wind comes and blows an object, based on the mass of the object moves. There is then, therefore, no proof that there's an outside force holding this object to the ground. Now, David comes along and wants to do science. There's electromagnetic fields. And we can play with those electromagnetic fields, and we can get things to move. And we can play with the negative charges and the positive charges, and we can defy their gravity. They used to call this anti-gravity. And this is science. This is the experience of knowledge. You have a hypothesis, and then you go out and you test it. The difference between Dan's science is he's not willing to change his hypothesis, no matter what. So you run the Cavendish experiment, and you don't get the same numbers through and through. I don't care if it's off by a tiny little decimal. It's not proving that the cause to your effect was the thing you're saying it is. Now you need to change your hypothesis. They'll never look into the fact that we could live on a flat plane. It's impossible to prove that we don't live on a plane, because if it is a ball, we live on the plane of the ball, and then the science, the gravity, then makes it a flat plane. That's basically how the high-level scientists argue it. Then these lower-level cult members come along because they want to shine, and they say the most ridiculous arguments. They say the most ridiculous things. They say everything falls at the same speed. Well, no, the guy in the flying squirrel suit does not fall as fast as the guy that's not wearing the flying squirrel suit. Things that catch the air then drift with the air. There's no proof of this force pulling everything to the center of mass. Now, David would not dispute that, and David isn't going against that with his electromagnetic forces, electricity basically, explaining that. He's trying to go science with them. He's trying to go science against science with them. And I'm critical of that. I'm critical of doing science with religious zealots. These are cult leaders that wear robes, that go in rooms, that do creepy ceremonies, that hurt children, and you're trying to beat them. We need to beat the government. If they were really bothered by flat earthers, then let's take this to the government. Let's take this to the Supreme Court. They only teach one cosmology in the schools, heliocentrism. That's huge. Taxes are forced spiritual payment. It should be really easy to agree with people on how we're going to spend the money. Like, keep your own money and then pay for what you want. If you want to send rocket ships to outer space, then you take your money and you give it to people to go do that for you. If I don't want to do that, I shouldn't have to do that. None of these globers would give money to NASA if they weren't forced to. But they want to take our money and force us to pay for it. So then that dream can be alive in their mind, but it can be alive in their mind through us. They want us to give them their energy. That's the tricky part. And that's the part I push back on Dave, because he's doing this show. He's got a fun presentation. He's being shadow banned, but not that much. And he had enough resources, enough money to get his app going and get his website going. He has his backup plan going. He came in late to Flat Earth. He came out of nowhere. He was doing a show called Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, and he wasn't going very deep. And I contacted him, and I said, Dave, the real issue is the manipulation of value, and they're doing it through where you live, first and foremost. They're doing it through your home, not just the money. And I like Dave. Don't get me wrong. I am critical of him at times, but I do like him. He's a really, really nice guy. He's a really nice guy. I'm not trying to be divisive or end fight with him. I just, where there is a disagreement, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to, be on the same side, but then have a different issue. And I don't even disagree with him on this issue. I think where he takes gravity is fine. It is a little risky because these cult members want to argue science so bad. Oh, they love talking about science. Oh, they love you can talk about particles, and now you can talk about eons and ions and neutrons and all the rest of it, and they've already made up their minds. It'll just give them avenues to steer the conversation in a way that kind of gets you to forget that Newtonian physics is about things sticking to a spinning ball. If you don't have a spinning ball, you don't need forces to hold you down. Your weight will hold you down. Now, the air is just not that thick. The air is just not that heavy. The air is just not that much. There's just not that much there. So something light will just fall at the same speed of something heavy because there's nothing interacting even with that very light thing. Now, helium will rise, and a hot air balloon will rise, which 100% disproves their gravity. 100% disproves their gravity. Again, gravity is a force that's pulling everything to the center of mass. A hot air balloon has mass, has different kinds of mass. The helium has a mass, and then the cloth or the plastic making the balloon has a mass. If there's no force pulling it down, because the center of mass is the ground, or is the center of mass over here, that's ridiculous. It's really silly, man. And it was brought to you by a guy who wore a robe, who worked for an organization that hurts children. He was a Jesuit priest. Cavendish wore a robe. He went to cult meetings and he probably hurt children. Dan probably wears a robe and he probably hurts children.